Right, not gonna lie, I didn't really want it to come to this, but a lot of you have been asking for a video on Brexit, so here we go. Right, so, as you may or may not be aware, in 2016, the people of Britain voted by a narrow margin to leave the European Union. As of the general election that we've just experienced in 2019, it is almost certain that Brexit is a key issue for most voters in the country. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson, good old Bojo, has been effectively given his mandate to get Brexit done. One thing, this video is going to be apolitical, but it will focus on the problems that the NHS might face due to Brexit, because that is what you have asked me to do. If you decide to talk about Brexit in your interview, you should be apolitical, and I realise that that can represent an intellectual challenge for some people. This is your daily reminder that if you are not capable of arguing for the opposite side as effectively as you are your own side in a debate, then you have no business being in the debate at all. Keep politics out of your professional interviews. So, Brexit in the NHS, what does it all mean? What's going on? Ultimately, nobody really knows, and that is the source of most of the problems. Economic uncertainty does two key things, both of which I'm going to talk about now. The first is that it drops the value of the pound relative to international currencies purely because of instability. And it also can lead to lack of foreign investment, but we'll talk about each of these separately. So firstly, we're going to talk about recruitment. If the pound drops, this makes UK wages less competitive relative to those wages in international countries. Given that the UK NHS relies on large amounts of EU immigrants coming here to work in jobs that often UK citizens simply don't want to do, this might understandably disincentivise them from coming here when they could go and work elsewhere for more competitive wages. But beyond just EU states, this same principle applies internationally. That also means that we can't rely on non-EU international workers coming here because our wages are relatively low if the pound drops. That affects everyone pretty much equally, and it's fairly simple economic. Furthermore, as you may or may not be aware, we actually have something called the Immigrant Health Surcharge active in the UK. Anyone from outside the European Economic Area has to pay this cost to cover their own healthcare that they receive while they're here. It's currently set at £400 per year per person, and it's likely to rise to £600 a year in the near future. Whether it rises or not, it's clear that if an international potential health worker wants to come to the UK and bring a family with them, you're potentially looking at thousands of pounds to cover everyone's care. Given the wages that these workers are likely to be earning, that may serve to further dissuade them. And lastly, you may have seen that the new immigration white paper that the government has released specifies a £30,000 minimum salary that people will need to come and live in the UK, which will obviously immediately price many healthcare workers out of the market, particularly the ones that we actually need. You know, for reference, even a newly qualified doctor in the UK doesn't earn £30,000 a year. Secondly, 5.5%, or just over 1 in 20 of the NHS workforce active in the UK at the moment are EU citizens working abroad. That accounts for 5% of nurses and midwives and 9% of our doctors. And the King's Fund actually tells us that both the NHS and social care services have become increasingly reliant on EU migrants to fill the posts over time. But the political climate brought about by Brexit, whether intentional or not, it depends who you talk to, but as has been vocalised, the political climate brought about by Brexit, whether it's real or perceived, depending on who you believe, has caused many of these workers to feel uneasy and unwelcome in a system that they don't feel supports them, with substantial portions saying that they're planning to leave as a result. In a situation where 50% of UK-educated junior doctors don't enter specialty training immediately, and many choose to go and work abroad in places like Canada and Australia, this will clearly not be very helpful. And there may also need to be changes around recognition of medical degrees, and this may also limit where UK doctors are actually able to go and work. Just an interesting fact that you might want to reflect on is that The UK population generally seems to believe that migrants place undue stress on the NHS and healthcare services. The government studies that have been done on migration actually show that the opposite is true. EU migrants are net contributors to the NHS, partially because the ones that tend to come here are young and healthy and therefore don't use it. They're also actually more likely to work within the NHS, the only exception to this being in maternity care. Now, let's talk about trade and investment. In terms of research, there are actually two schools of thought. Leaving the EU obviously makes it more difficult for us to access partner institutions and collaborate on research, as well as funding programs such as Horizon 2020, which was an €80 billion research initiative. This is also important for particularly rare medical conditions, where individual countries simply don't have enough patients to study them properly. But we can perform trials if we share data between countries. Surprisingly, however, Brexit does seem to have acted as some sort of catalyst for a massive surge in UK clinical trial activity. And we have to remember that the UK is one of the world's leading pharmaceutical research countries. According to Cancer Research UK, 1/4 of the most popular prescription drugs were actually discovered in the UK, as were 3 of the top 5 globally selling drugs. We shouldn't downplay the UK's ability to do its own research, and the experts do seem to be suggesting that Brexit won't be as disastrous for our own research as some newspapers are putting out. More of an immediate problem, however, is our access to supplies of medications. As you can imagine, we are highly reliant on many EU countries for manufacture and purchase of many common drugs that we need. As of present, we tend to restock our drug supplies according to what's called a just-in-time protocol. And all this means is that we get more drugs from our suppliers, many of which are in the EU, as our own supplies run low. And we just do this because it's efficient. It means that we only buy what we need when we need it, and we don't have warehouses full of stuff that we're not going to use. However, disruptions to these existing agreements due to Brexit have caused the government to call for a 6-week stockpile of medications. Many pharmacists have reported that they're unable to get hold of many common drugs, such as some contraceptives, vaccines, anti-epileptic drugs, antidepressants, antihypertensives, and insulin. Hormone replacement therapy at the moment is also incredibly difficult to get hold of, and drugs with short shelf lives, such as some chemotherapy agents and the radioisotopes that we need for some types of medical imaging, present a huge source of concern because we can't stockpile them. These will likely need to be flown in as we need them from other countries. We're also beginning to see a practice called GP rationing, where certain GPs are being told to limit the number of specialist referrals that they make in a particular time period. So this covers interventions such as hernia repair, hip replacement, referral to specialist pain clinics for people with chronic pain syndromes, as well as public health programs, and there was a notable one that was aimed at tackling obesity in children. That one-to-one support initiative has now just been replaced with an online support platform. And some GPs are also being instructed to find cheaper alternative medications for their patients rather than the ones that are best clinically indicated. So obviously care is beginning to be affected. Lastly, another thing we could consider is that of what are called reciprocal care arrangements. Many of you will recognise this, the little purple EHIC, the European Health Insurance Card. This basically entitles you to free healthcare in another European country while you're travelling abroad. The agreements on these things runs out next year, meaning that potentially when Brits travel to Europe, we will have to pay for our own healthcare, which can often be incredibly expensive. So look guys, there's the Brexit video. Obviously with the way things are at the moment, things could have changed in between me writing this script and this video going live, as is the nature of the beast. Please remember that new agreements probably will and probably have to be put in place to replace these existing agreements and protocols that we've spoken about, just out of necessity, both political and societal, because the Conservative government knows, as well as anyone, that keeping the NHS alive in some form is as important to the UK public as Brexit is, the closest thing that we have to a national religion. Maybe even more so. So I think we're just in a position where we have to wait and see what happens. But you know, if you have concerns, speak to your local MP. go protest. That's what these things are for. So thanks very much for watching, guys. This is one of those ones where I'd really love to know what you think. It's a really contentious problem, and I'm sure that I've missed things. I'm not as politically educated as some of you out there. I just research what I can and what I understand. Please be sure to hit that like button for me, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to go and check out PostGradMedic for more free medical interview resources just like this. If you want to support the channel, guys, there are 3 simple ways. The first one is like, comment, share it with a friend, and subscribe. The second is you can buy me a coffee using my Ko-Fi link in the description, or you can use my referral link to save 10% off your first year subscription to Complete Anatomy 2020, my favourite 3D anatomy platform. Take care, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.